Jessica has always dreamed of escaping the hustle and bustle of the big city and finding a peaceful getaway in the mountains. When her friends agreed to spend a weekend in a secluded house rented on Airbnb, she saw the perfect opportunity to make her dream come true. The advertised house, situated in the heart of a dense forest, seemed like the ideal place for a relaxing break. They planned a weekend of hiking, barbecues, and cozy nights in front of the fireplace. However, what was supposed to be a peaceful getaway would soon turn into a terrifying nightmare. When they arrived at the house, they were struck by its appearance. The rustic wooden building was even more picturesque in person, with a welcoming porch and large windows offering stunning mountain views. The feeling of isolation was comforting, and they couldn't wait to start the weekend. However, as soon as they entered the house, a strange feeling enveloped them. The host, a man named Edward, was waiting for them. He seemed overly interested in every aspect of your stay. As he showed them around the house, he asked invasive questions about their personal lives and weekend plans. Jessica and her friends, trying to remain polite, laughed nervously, attributing their curiosity to their desire to be a good host. But there was something in Edward's eyes that bothered them, an unsettling stare that didn't match his friendly expression. At the end of the tour, Edward insisted on showing them the security measures in the house. He pointed to several security cameras that were strategically placed both inside and outside the house. This made them uncomfortable, as cameras had not been mentioned in the Airbnb listing. Edward tried to reassure them, explaining that it was only for security reasons and that they were not monitoring private areas. Despite their explanations, the feeling of being watched persisted. That night, they enjoyed a cozy dinner and relaxed in front of the fireplace. But the uneasiness caused by the security cameras did not leave them. As the night wore on, they couldn't shake the feeling that the house had eyes everywhere. As they prepared to sleep, the feeling of being watched increased. Even with the curtains closed, the darkness seemed alive with invisible eyes. Jessica and her friends tried to shake off the disturbing thoughts and settled into their rooms. Jessica, lying in bed with her eyes fixed on the dark ceiling, finally fell asleep. However, what would happen in that isolated house in the mountains that night would be an experience they would never forget. The first night in the Airbnb house was a mix of peace and restlessness. The beauty of the mountains and the roaring fireplace contrasted with the persistent feeling that they were being watched. However, they tried to focus on relaxing and enjoying their well-deserved getaway. However, as the night progressed, strange sounds began to disturb his peace. Soft footsteps echoed through the hallways, as if someone was walking through the house. They would wake up to the sound, convinced that someone was there. But when they checked the rooms and hallways, they found the house empty. The night sounds continued, disturbing everyone's sleep. They swore they heard whispers in the darkness, as if someone were whispering indistinct words. They tried to convince themselves that it was just the creaking wood, but the uneasiness persisted. Jessica woke up during the night with the feeling that someone was watching. She looked around the room but didn't see anything out of the ordinary. However, something disturbed her. It looked like his personal things were out of place, as if someone had tampered with them. Upon examining her diary, she noticed that some pages had been leafed through and found traces of hands on her personal belongings. His friends also reported similar experiences, with objects apparently moved and disturbed during the night. Their uneasiness turned to fear when, the next morning, they found a disturbing message on their bathroom mirror. Written in blood-red letters, the message read, "I am always watching." Terror gripped the group. They could no longer ignore the disturbing events taking place in that isolated house in the mountains. They knew they were being watched, but they had no idea who or what was behind it. They decided to confront Edward, the host, about the disturbing events. He seemed surprised and tried to downplay the situation, insisting there was nothing wrong. Edward assured them that the cameras did not monitor private areas, but the feeling of being watched persisted. The tension in the house reached its peak when they decided to check the basement. Edward had mentioned that it was just a storage space, but they were determined to find out if something else was hidden there. As they descended the stairs, the feeling of being watched accompanied them. What they found in the basement horrified them. The space was filled with secretly taken photos of them during their stay, showing them relaxing, cooking, and even sleeping. The photos were accompanied by newspaper clippings of unsolved murders, all related to the crimes of stalkers and sinister intruders. It was clear that Edward was obsessed with them. They felt invaded and vulnerable, knowing that someone inside the house was watching their every move. With hearts racing, they returned to the main room, determined to confront Edward about his findings. However, when they went upstairs, they realized something was wrong. Edward had disappeared. The feeling that they were being watched grew even more, and terror gripped them. They were trapped in an isolated house in the mountains with an unknown and dangerous stalker. The truth about her stalker's identity remained unclear, and the nightmare was far from over. With Edward missing and the feeling of being watched growing, Jessica and her friends were trapped in an increasingly dangerous situation. Determined to discover the identity of their stalker and ensure their own safety, they decided to investigate the house thoroughly. Exploring every corner of the house, they discovered a secret basement that had not been mentioned by Edward. Inside, they found a wall covered in newspaper clippings about unsolved murders and stalker crimes. Photos secretly taken of them during their stay were scattered across the floor. The evidence was overwhelming. Edward was obsessed with them and apparently involved in some way in the nightmare they were living. As they explored the basement, they heard a sound coming from above. Someone was in the house with them. The feeling of imminent danger was overwhelming. They walked up the stairs cautiously, ready to face their pursuer. When they arrived upstairs, they found the house empty. The feeling of being watched was still present, but there was no sign of Edward or anyone else. The stalker was somewhere, hiding in the shadows. The group decided to return to their rooms, where they remained awake, paying attention to every sound and movement. Every sound put them on alert, and every shadow in the darkness was cause for suspicion. The stalker was cunning, moving silently and attacking when least expected. The night dragged on, and the terror intensified. The friends felt like prey in a deadly game, and the stalker always seemed one step ahead. Time passed slowly, and the feeling of helplessness increased with each passing minute. The next morning, they found new disturbing signs. Messages written in fake blood were scattered around the house, all addressed to them. One of them said, "The Valley of Shadows is your destiny." It was a threat that left them speechless, as they knew that the Valley of Shadows was the name of the remote area where the house was located. Jessica and her friends began to realize that the situation was becoming more dangerous by the moment. They were trapped in an isolated house in the mountains with an unknown stalker, and they couldn't trust anyone. The next night approached, and the nightmare continued with no end in sight. The only thing they were sure of was that they needed to find a way to get out of that place and escape the stalker who was chasing them. United by fear and determination, they formed a plan to defend themselves and seek help. The nightmare was far from over, but they were determined to survive and discover the truth about the stalker that haunted them. The isolated house in the mountains had turned into a nightmare scenario, with Jessica and her friends fighting for their own survival. They knew they were being watched by an unknown stalker, but the stalker's identity remained unclear. Determined to confront the stalker, the group began to formulate a plan. They collected objects from the house that could be used for their defense, including kitchen knives and blunt objects. Every sound put them on alert, and every shadow in the darkness was cause for suspicion. Night fell once again, bringing with it a feeling of constant terror. As they waited, the stalker seemed to play with them, moving silently and attacking when they least expected it. They stood together, whispering words of encouragement to keep hope alive. However, tension grew as the night progressed. The stalker was there, watching their every move. The sound of soft footsteps echoed in the hallways, sending them into a panic. They had to face the imminent danger. There was no other option. Armed with improvised objects, they began to search the house, looking for clues that would lead them to the stalker. Every sound made them tremble, but their determination to survive overcame their fear. The house was silent as they entered the living room, their eyes fixed on the darkness. Suddenly, a loud noise echoed from the kitchen, causing everyone to turn around with a start. The tension reached its peak when they saw the stalker, a dark, hooded figure emerging from the shadows. A scream of pure terror filled the room as the battle began. The stalker was determined not to let anyone escape alive. They fought with all their strength, throwing blows and shouting for help. The house became a battlefield, with furniture being knocked over and objects flying. In a desperate moment, Jessica managed to hit the stalker with a well-placed blow. The stalker backed away momentarily, allowing the group to gain some distance. They took the opportunity to escape the house. They ran into the darkness of the forest, with the stalker in pursuit. The dense forest and rugged terrain made escape challenging. Every step was a fight for their lives as the stalker pursued them relentlessly. Adrenaline drove them, and they continued to run, hoping to find help somewhere remote. The chase seemed endless, but the group did not give up. They were determined to survive. Finally, after a desperate run through the forest, they found a road and, luckily, a car passing by. They shouted for help, and the driver stopped to help them. The stalker, unable to reach them, disappeared into the darkness of the forest. Police were called, and a search was launched in the area. However, the stalker remained elusive, leaving behind only the trail of terror he had inflicted on the group. As morning dawned and the situation calmed, Jessica and her friends hugged each other, relieved to have survived the night of terror. They knew the nightmare wouldn't be forgotten so easily, but they also knew they had overcome a terrifying challenge together. The Airbnb house in the mountains had become a haunted place in their memories, and the unknown stalker would remain an inexplicable threat. They survived a threat they could not explain, but learned that courage and unity can overcome even the darkest horrors. They were determined to move forward, but the Valley of Shadows would continue to haunt their dreams and memories.